Knows that province incredibly well. We'll have a view on how it's dealt with the situation. Is Athol Trollip, former DA leader, former DA mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. Athol, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time this Sunday afternoon. How would you rate how the province has dealt with the situation so far?
Stephen, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. It's been a while. First of all, I really want to stress that there's been some real political will expressed by Cyril Ramaphosa and all the people in his cabinet with regard to this dealing with this pandemic. And I think if you read the Sunday Times today, there's some juxtaposition between how the Thabo Mbeki era dealt with AIDS and comparing how we're dealing with COVID-19 in this province. So I think the lockdown and the decisions that were made up front were very tactical and I think refreshing indeed from President Ramaphosa. The Eastern Cape is always going to be a very difficult province to cope with COVID-19 because of the nature of the province. There are two metro cities in Buffalo City and Nelson Mandela Bay where most of the people live. But then there are vast tracts of the province where millions of South Africans live in deeply rural conditions, and it's very difficult to assess the impact of COVID-19 there. The health facilities are certainly inadequate in those kind of communities, but we've also seen health facilities across this province that are under-resourced and underprepared for dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think it was very important to have this lockdown to flatten the curve, if I can use that term, and then allow the province to prepare itself. But I don't believe that any amount of preparation is going to prepare us for when we do reach the peak, because unfortunately this province has the highest unemployment rate. Some of the most impoverished people in the country live in this province. And there are some good things that have come out of it, though, Stephen. In the communities, people have started to realize the difference between unemployed people and people in the informal employment sector, as opposed to those who have formal employment, who always seem to be wanting and demanding more. Those that are unemployed or work in the informal sector now find themselves unable to feed themselves. And that is a tragic reality of a province that is primarily faced with unemployed young people and aged people who rely on remittances from family members from further afield or government grants.
There's been a big conversation, I don't know if you've come across it, Athol, where it seems in some cases government has been able to deliver more during this time than it has before COVID-19, and talking specifically, for example, around water. I mean, literally hundreds, I think, thousands of water tanks being delivered to various communities around the country in a way that was not the case beforehand, despite the crisis. Are you able to explain how this has happened? Has this maybe given people in government more of an impetus than they had before?
Well, most certainly, Stephen. I think everybody knows that life will never be the same again in the Eastern Cape and in South Africa and the rest of the world. Things have changed for forever. And some of the things that have changed is that government realizes where their priorities should lie. And these past weeks have shown that if you do put your head down and you concentrate on the important issues like providing water and food and sanitation, and even concentrate on transport challenges for people that live far from opportunities of work and healthcare and those kind of things, that if you concentrate on those issues, that you can make things happen on the ground. Another thing that really struck me is that many people in this province and in this country have already changed their behavior with regard to waste and sanitation. You know, our society is really bad at wasting, and our personal waste, stuff that we throw away, we don't look after the environment. And I think having been locked down, people have understood that it's very, very important not to waste things, to use every resource that you have optimally and not throw it away and not throw it down. And I think this has been a good breathing period for the environment. So I think there has been some sobering realization that the extent of poverty is really grave in this province. And I've seen some people extending a hand of generosity that I've never seen before, and it's been amazing to see how people are reaching out to each other, especially to the impoverished people. And the real best way to deal with poverty and unemployment is for our economy to get going. And I think one of the things that, even though our economy has been locked down for the last 3 weeks, people are talking more about the economy now than ever before, and I think that that's encouraging. People realize that if we don't have economic growth in our country, and we don't do the right things to give effect to that growth, then we're never going to be able to tackle poverty and what happens to poor people when these kind of pandemics break out. Because it's the poor that suffer the most. And we've even seen with the excesses of, the police and the army, we've seen some real brutality. And in this province, we haven't been spared any of that. And I couldn't help this morning when a friend of mine sent me something. I don't know if you read it, Stephen, but there's a quote from C.S. Lewis, who said many, many years ago, of all the tyrannies, those exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Better to live under the robber's baron than under omnipotent moral busybodies. Those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end. Close quote. So C.S. Lewis said that in a time of this kind of disaster, when people come out and ostensibly treat us harshly for our very own good, we see the kind of excesses that we've seen before under the apartheid government, and we're seeing it again now. So we must never forget that our rights that are enshrined in our Constitution must be protected above everything, and poor people need that protection more than anybody else.
There's a conversation around whether the lockdown should be extended. To listen to you, particularly with that quote, you would suggest perhaps that maybe you don't think it should be extended. We need to look again at how we manage this situation.
Look, our lockdown has been extended already. So, we will essentially have been in lockdown for 5 weeks when the end of this lockdown comes to an end, or projected end. And I really am of the belief that we need to have a slow opening of our economy again so that people can start earning some money, especially people who in the informal sector that live from hand to mouth. They're the people that I'm most concerned about. A group of friends and I we're giving some food parcels out through our local councillor to, caddies at our local golf course. Because, if the caddies aren't caddying somebody's bag and earning something on a daily basis, there's literally nothing coming into that household. So I was very interested to see that the government is now talking about perhaps introducing a basic income grant, which is something that when I was involved in politics, we pushed really hard. For all South Africans who don't have any income, that they should have some kind of basic income grant. Because those that rely on a hand-to-mouth existence, once they're locked down for 5 weeks, no human being can go without food for 5 weeks. And some people just don't have any access to money to buy food. And the government has found it very difficult to hand out food parcels to the millions of people that need food. So essentially, we need people to be able to go back to work. We need people to stimulate our economy and create work. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to focus on. But we all understand that the peak of this COVID-19 has not reached us in South Africa, and that's why I'm really concerned that the education and the understanding amongst the majority of the people in this country is really poor. And there's been a lot of confusion with some of the ministers that have acted really irresponsibly with tweets on social media and doing the damnedest things. I really think that Cyril Ramaphosa needs everybody's support to speak out of the same side of their mouths and to do the same thing and to do it in the best interest of people, and not to have heavy-handed ministers showing off and bullying people during this time of difficulty.
And Athol, the Eastern Cape, as you say, a rural province primarily, apart from 2 main urban centres. Could that rural nature of it perhaps protect people from infection? In other words, if the lockdown was started early enough, it may mean that some of those communities don't get affected by the coronavirus.
I think so. I think very much so, that they might be immunized against it. But even though these communities are rural, Stephen, there were some incidences over the Easter weekend where hundreds of taxis from the Western Cape were either stopped, some were stopped and searched, and some had, false permits, and others managed to slip through the roadblocks. So those communities aren't completely immunized against the virus coming in from the outside. And the problem is in those communities that if the virus does come in from the outside, and you were talking about funerals, many of the countries that are in lockdown have suspended all funerals. And now in this country, I don't understand it. We're in a severe lockdown where many privileges have been taken away from people, like, accessing alcohol or cigarettes or cooked food. You can't do all of that, yet you can go to a funeral. Now, in the countries that are successfully locking down their societies so that they can flatten the curve properly, there are no funerals. And yet we allow funerals to continue. And if people come to funerals from the major cities into the rural areas, you can believe me that infection will spread like a wildfire in those communities, because those people all live hand to mouth. They all live very close to each other. Many of them don't have access to proper sanitation. So sanitizing their environment that they live in is very difficult, and that will spread like wildfire. So very important to prevent external infection coming into those deep rural areas. And if that can be prevented, those communities can be sheltered from infection of COVID-19.